Hello, and thanks everyone for joining today's conversation. 5 ways COVID has accelerated touchless hiring and onboarding. So it's interesting we talk about being touchless versus digital because I think the continuum of the digital recruiting, hiring, onboarding process has been going on for decades, right? Going back, 20 plus years to, simply having PDFs of resumes and emailing them versus having to drop them off. Obviously, we've come a long ways from there for the automation of processes to online recruiting platforms, in just simply the digitization of forms like a W-4 to 9-9. But it seems to me that COVID has really just accelerated this process, and some of it really by necessity, because not only were we down this digital automated continuum, but now in many cases in the past several months we haven't had a choice, right? There wasn't an option to be face to face, and it forced things to be digital. But I think we chose this title of touchless rather than digital because I think there's still some aspects that are kind of analog, if you will, that require paper maybe as the best practice still, but it can still remain touchless. So what we want to do is talk today about this whole touchless / digital world of the recruiting, hiring, onboarding process, and then specifically how COVID has really accelerated that. So joining me today is Assure's Vice President of Human Resources, Cheryl Tribula. Thank you and welcome, Cheryl. And on her team, Director of Talent Acquisition, Mike Reed, and Krista Cease, Corporate Recruiter. So these three have just tons and tons of experience doing this over really, I'd say, hundreds of transactions, and I think have some best practices. So welcome, Cheryl, Mike, and Krista.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. There's probably more than 5 ways, but we want to kind of neatly package the conversation, right? So let's talk about the ways. And I think as we were kind of planning for this conversation, one of the things that jumped out is this is not just a change for the hiring manager or the hiring company, right? This is a change for job seekers as well. So can you guys maybe just talk to us about how the recruiting process has become even more touchless, and maybe more important than how it's become touchless, what the impacts are for job seekers and hiring managers?
Yeah, so I think the job seeker has gotten to a point where they are much more demanding on the front end. Your brand makes a big difference in how they engage, and that was true before you got into COVID. But that first impression, even on your web page, for what your culture is like, that it's live, that it's real, and that it extends on through the interview process is really important to them. Something that has to be alive and really capture them to set you apart in the competition for talent today.
Mike, say more about what you mean by being live and real.
So I think, video examples with people telling their stories about how they've embraced the culture. One of our big pieces here is embracing change. And if you don't embrace change in a fast growing company like Assure, it's tough to be successful. And so people need to feel that on the way in, and be able to realize that that's something that they're going to need to do or that they're excited about doing. And then, you start to qualify talent then on the front end, even before you've had a touch, even before you've had a conversation with that candidate, because they are bonded to your culture and to how your company operates before you have that first interaction with them.
So you'd like to think we're really good at this, but we're not perfect. Can you maybe give us an example of what good looks like, but also maybe an example of what not good looks like, and maybe you got a great candidate that you didn't make the impression you wanted?
I think the breakdown happens not good is when your interviewing team isn't embracing the culture or isn't speaking to the culture throughout the entire interview process, and everybody should be engaged on that. So what it feels like on the front end, you're reinforcing it at every touch point with the candidate. throughout the interview process. And when you have a breakdown there in the middle where somebody on that interview panel either isn't measuring on the same pieces, it becomes almost like you've got a broken bike chain, and they start to lose momentum through that qualification process, and you can have a candidate turn outwards. On a good example, it's, we have our mission, vision, values, and culture listed clear on the page. We have video of people sharing their stories about the culture, how it's impacted their lives, how it's impacted our customers' lives. And then you have an interview team that's engaged around the candidates' culture experiences that they've had, and then the culture that they want to be a part of going forward.
You know what? That's a really interesting angle about this whole. It's not just what the website says, right? It's not just what the job description says, wherever they found it, Indeed, Glassdoor, LinkedIn, wherever, but really the continuity of the entire process. We'll talk about that in a second and go deeper when we talk about interviewing. Cheryl, what would you add for this touchless process for job seekers and managers when it comes to just the really front end of this process to recruiting? How's it changed?
Well, for me, I was just going to add to the culture piece. I was thinking as you guys were talking through it. So as Mike said, when we're recruiting and we're interviewing and we're talking about our culture, and they're hearing that throughout the entire process, it's very important that when they are hired and they do get here, that is what they're experiencing. So if you have multiple locations, let's say we have one in Rochester or Santa Ana example, we really need to ensure that our culture is truly what we're saying it is, and that all of our different locations are operating in the same manner and all living the mission, vision, values the way that we're, explaining it to candidates.
Yeah, and so one of the things I want to go deeper on this topic for the recruiting. We talk about we've had this digital continuum, right? And so another thing that's been evolutionary in the last, call it 2 decades, is this virtual work and flexible work. In some cases, it was full-time work from home, where in this last 6-9 months, flexible work for many, or even just straight up report to your office work, turned into full-time work from home for I'd say millions of people, right? Mike, you and I had a conversation about how this work from home isn't going away for a lot of companies. So this has been a tipping point for a lot of companies that, hey, we actually find that we're pretty darn productive. We didn't want to go there. We were our hand was forced, so to speak, but this is working really well. And what it's opened up is possibly a new talent pool, because, the geography, the commute time, how much traffic there is to get from home to office is all of a sudden no longer one of the criteria when seeking out talent. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how it's broadened the talent pool, because the best candidate didn't always necessarily live in your location where your office was. And what it's done for us as an organization is really said, let's go find the best talent that can impact our mission and the results that we want out of it, regardless of where they live. So instead of looking at just our Rochester location, well, this job could be done any place in the United States. Now that talent pool is elevated, it's much more competitive. You'll see a broader range of scope and skills that come in that maybe you didn't think about before, that are really going to be impactful to the role, because you're not just focused on a geolocation. And then I think on the backside, it's the mission that really drives people to be successful when they're remote. Do I buy into the mission? How am I impactful? How are my impacts received by the company, and how am I recognized? Those touch points of recognition change. It's no longer in the office. It's through daily calls or stand-ups or a dashboard that flashes in front of you and lets you know, hey, yeah, I'm top 5% in the company, and I want to maintain that rating, right? So the engagement starts on the front end, but it's got to continue with them on a remote place. How do you extend your culture beyond the four walls?
Krista, you're talking to tentative, prospective candidates all day, every day. How do you see this change in talent pool when you kind of stop having geographic borders on your job descriptions?
I mean, when we talk about the accelerated pieces, right, of the things that really have come into play since COVID, or maybe was in the works prior to COVID, there's just so many ways to connect with candidates. And like LinkedIn has accelerated their tool, so you can now have a non-geographical location. So candidates, when they're looking at your job, can see that you have a non-geographical location choice. They've also accelerated the use of a video for a candidate to submit a video for a recruiter to view and watch. And all of those things allow us to connect at that touchless level in a way that we weren't able to connect before and across all of the geographies.
Yeah, it's interesting, this trend towards videos, prospective candidates putting themselves out there. I used to coach youth football, and I remember young kids getting game tape was really important, and it's kind of, we've crossed the chasm from athletes needing game tape to show to prospective colleges to the same is true for talent, and it goes both ways, right? Because the best candidates are interviewing us as much as we're interviewing them.
Exactly.
Carol, anything else?
I was just going to say also to add to that, I mean, and also from a budget standpoint, I mean, you think about companies that are offshoring their work to other countries so that they can get it at a more affordable cost. It's the same thing here. I mean, you might be able to have a strategy where you're going to hire in a certain part of the U.S. where, the compensation may be lower than it is in, say, a city like Austin or New York. So I think that has been accelerated as well from a budget standpoint.
Yeah, there's no question. There's a cost factor that, hiring in 2 or 3 markets or even rural markets, there's some amazing talent out there, and, not to begrudge those folks, but the cost of living is just wildly different, and therefore salary bands can be wildly different. Cheryl, any final thoughts you would have on this whole talent pool? Because I almost feel like this is the sleeping giant in all of this. There's best practices around video and planning. We'll talk more about interviewing here in a second. But it seems to me that, that this new open field of talent that they could literally live anywhere as long as they've got a high-speed internet connection and do the job. For so many companies now, if you're manufacturing and retail, no, but there's so many jobs that this is a game changer. What do you see as the difference, and maybe you speak to your own experience at Assure, when talent can live anywhere?
Well, I think now more than ever during COVID, there's been so many people affected by this, so many people that have lost their jobs, and thank goodness for this, because now I can live in a rural city and maybe I can work for a company that's in Austin just because they're looking for the best talent. So I think now more than ever, with the amount of people that are unemployed and things like that, it's more important than ever. So
Yeah. All right, let's jump to the next one. So obviously, in a COVID world where offices and places of business were closed, depending where you're listening to this talk today, you may still be closed. You might be at some different phases of opening. Clearly, I think no one is 100% back to where we were. This is a tipping point that at least some things will have changed forever. But I think just getting beyond the obvious, that interviews may be happening more frequently in video conferencing. Certainly, there's social distancing ways to do it in a face-to-face manner. But beyond just, hey guys, go do these things via video, how else has the interview process changed? And Mike, I'm real interested in the conversation you and I had about the planning and the follow-up process. And you earlier referenced the team who's doing the interviewing, right?
Yeah, yeah. So I think, pre-COVID, we were still planning with the interview team, right? Here's what you're measuring against. Here's what the job's going to impact. Here how it's going to fit into the team, and here's your role during the interview process. But we also fell back and really kind of got comfortable in the tribal knowledge that would happen before and after an interview, right? Where we're all in the room together and talking with each other about what this looks like. And in a world where you're Zoom or digitally interviewing somebody, you don't have a lot of that soft time with each other. The tribal knowledge has kind of walked out the door. So it's become even more important that we're defining that on the front end, that we're engaging our hiring teams as a talent-driven organization to really define what great looks like, make sure that we're all aligned. And then on the debrief, that we're listening to each other's point of views, that we're measuring on the same, qualities that we need in a candidate. And it's got to be more formal, because otherwise that knowledge kind of goes out the window and you've lost it. And I think we've just had to be much more purposeful in how we plan, how we engage in those pre-interview meetings now happening, and then in the post debrief. Make sure that we're really capturing all that information as well.
Mike, let's take that a layer or two deeper. So I think, if you're an HR manager, you're a hiring manager, you work at a big company or medium-sized company, or at least you've worked at those companies, you kind of get a feel for what that process looks like. But, the average small business, maybe has, 15, 20, 25, 30 employees. And the interview process truly was, I like your use of the word tribal. It was more, come on in, you would do a walk around, you meet the crew, and certainly there is probably a formal part for assessment of skills, maybe in the office somewhere, but there's also an informal cultural fit kind of part. Bring that to life for the small business manager, the entrepreneur, for that small company where interviewing really was a face-to-face affair, not just because of practicality, because that's where everybody happened to be.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of a mind shift, but it's still measuring those same pieces. You've just got to find how to work through them in a new medium. And that may be, someday we're going to return to the office, so let's take them on a tour. Someday we're not going to return to the office. Let's use our culture questions to really define what fits for us. And those questions should be repeatable and the same in every interview, so that every candidate has the same experience and everybody has the same opportunity to showcase how they're a fit for our culture. And we've defined that on the front end for them through the interview process, and they have an opportunity to really share as a candidate, what they're looking forward as the best fit for them. And then on the backside, it's looking at the candidate pool and evaluating who best fit our culture, who best fits the ability to deliver what's going to impact my small business and help me move forward and grow, which is what all of us small business owners are looking for. I think it's really defining those things on the front end, both for yourself internally, and then make sure the candidate knows what they're being measured against.
Krista, how do you see this come to life? Because you're the kind of the tip of the spear on Assure's behalf, talking to prospective candidates all the time, but then taking them through an entire process. What on the employer side, what does the best practice look like for that collaboration and planning?
Always best practices have been to really be able to identify what you're looking for in that candidate and have an effective way to measure it. I feel like the touchless process has taken out some of maybe our unconscious biases or even our conscious biases and allowed us to really get to the meat of, is this person the right fit for the job? Are they the right fit culturally? Are we evaluating on the right things? Are we making a decision because we had a really great conversation and the candidate had, are we making a decision based on the halo effect because maybe one candidate looked different than another candidate, right? We're taking some of those things away and we're driving even further into our ability to be able to evaluate and make good hires for our organization at a quality level. And
No,
I feel
that's
like that.
really, Krista, that's
Mhm.
really smart. I never even thought about that. I'm looking at a book on my shelf in my office right now, Moneyball, Michael Lewis's book, right, where talked about how to evaluate talent in Major League Baseball, the Oakland A's, and how all the money went to athletes who they're 6'3" and had the perfect physique and they looked like a ball player versus what the stats actually said, right? So it truly get the looks out of the way and actually evaluate talent. That's smart. Can you give some ideas and some suggestions for people listening in today about how to actually do that?
Um, it's back to some of the things that Mike has been saying, but just being very specific about what you need in the role. Not no two hires are the same. You may be hiring for the same position, but you're as you're building out your team and you're adding people, each individual brings their strengths and skills to the table. So knowing for your next hire what skills gaps you're trying to fill in for and being clear about defining that so you're very clear about that you're hiring for that um, really gets you to that end game.
Yeah, yeah. Cheryl, the whole interviewing process, how do you think, from a strategic viewpoint, how do you see things? I think maybe not just COVID really, but just the evolution of the best practices and these things being digital. We may have lost audio for a short minute.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I was on mute.
No worries.
Just from a strategy standpoint, I think it's important to have, different people within the organization interviewing, people at different levels. You want to make sure that, this person is going to be a good culture fit within the team. So you may have, a team interview where there's 3 or 4 people that are actually on the team interviewing, and then you might have the manager interview, just depending on the role. Um, and then just in terms of the video conferencing, I know this is a little funny, but I've had employees coming to me, what are best practices for video conferencing? You would assume that, if you've got, one of your people interviewing a candidate that they would know, not to eat a bowl of Cheerios while they're interviewing. And believe it or not, we've had to really come out and provide some data to our managers on best practices for video conferencing and webinars and things like that.
I guess it all depends on the kind of talent you're trying to recruit, right? That's awesome. Okay. Michael, I'm going to give you the opportunity to kind of close on this topic here. It seems to me like almost maybe the big punchline is here. I think a lot of things were probably pre-COVID. Maybe we were doing some video conferencing, maybe we weren't. People were coming into offices. Maybe the interview process was really tightly defined. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe we're multi-location, multi-person interview process. Maybe it wasn't. But I feel like the punchline here is this is a call to action to be more deliberate in the process, from planning to the questions we're going to ask. What skill sets are we mining for? How are we going to measure and quantify? How are we going to debrief and share? Is that kind of where you're at?
Yeah, I think it's all about defining what great looks like inside your organization, inside that department. And then it's the impacts that are going to help you achieve your short and long-term goals as a small business, right? And being deliberate and focused and making sure everybody is honed in on those same things is really important, and more important when you've got the you don't have that in-person interaction, because every hire is critical, and a bad hire is really impactful to your team as well, right? Both from a morale standpoint and a financial standpoint. So defining those things, being deliberate, engaging your hiring team so everybody's measuring on the same thing. We've got to make sure that that's really buttoned up, and that the candidate experience is good throughout the whole process, because remember, we're still competing for talent. While there may be people that have been unemployed, there are skill sets that are still in high demand, that'll be very impactful to your business, and those candidates do still have choices.
Yeah, right. Amen. Amen. All right, let's go to the next one here. So we talked about recruiting. We talked about the actual interviewing process. Now we've selected a candidate. How is the actual hiring process changed? So there's some fairly obvious, the digitization of forms, W4, I-9 kind of thing. What can you, Cheryl, maybe talk about, what has become digital, but then also, maybe not digital, but is touchless?
Yep. So, I mean, just like you said, the W-4s, those new hire forms, being added to your HRIS system. I know for us internally, one of the things we had in our roadmap for our own product was e-signature and digital signatures, and we've had to expedite that internally because of the need for our clients. And then the I-9, the government has come up with some laws where the I-9 process can now be touchless, because before you had to physically review those documents and be there physically with the person to validate the IDs that are used for the I-9, and now we're able to do that via a webinar or your Ring Central call. And I think that we'll see that probably stay in place for quite some time. Again, the I-9 will never be completely, without having human contact, right? Because you do have to verify those forms of IDs. With that candidate in person. But now I guess you would say via video.
And like you say, so it's like, okay, this feels to me like COVID has accelerated what was kind of a no-brainer thing to do, right? Hey, why can't we just hop on? I get a photocopy of a driver's license and some ID, and I can see this person in a video conference, and yep, that's the same person that's in the driver's license, all matches up. So I understand the need for a human-based verification process, but this feels like one of those things is probably never going back the old way, right?
It doesn't seem like it will. I mean, I don't think anything will ever go back to the way it was.
Right.
We've been forced into, doing business a different way, and we've really seen that it's kind of been a good thing, right? I mean, I think there's cases where some folks are more productive, and maybe there's some that aren't, but I don't think things will ever go back to the way it was before.
Yeah, right. Krista, what do you see? So you've taken your candidate through the recruiting and the interview process. How do you see this change when it being more touchless for the actual hiring process?
We had to implement, a few new processes, just even in what we were doing, more touch points, higher levels of communication. Of course, all of that's digital. As far as like moving them from the recruitment process, the offer process, into the onboarding process, right? Making sure that we were really clear and not necessarily just relying on the laurels of, our face-to-face in-person, hey, just stop by and grab this type of thing. Making sure that we just button up, what that process looks like and how that can reinforce the culture piece that we started in the recruitment process.
Can you give any examples where you kind of reinvented and kind of reasserted a new process that it had more touch points? And I think it's obvious, but why did you insert more touch points?
Just making sure that we're continuing to build that relationship with the new employee, and making sure that the those touch points we would have maybe done in person, right? We can talk about new hire packets that maybe we put on an employee's desk day one. All of a sudden, something new had to happen, right? You have people starting that aren't coming into the office. Their equipment's being shipped to them. Making sure that they understand when their equipment's going to arrive, making sure that they feel welcomed inside of the organization. And so we put together a new hire packet that was more digital, what to expect, even some first aid trainings, what to expect, and having those pre-sent to the employees. I think Cheryl implemented a great system for us in regards to the welcome swag, and I think she can speak to that quite a bit. That was something that we did new as well.
Yeah, I'm going to say that for onboarding, but I'm with you. And I keep coming back to, I think Mike made a comment earlier about it's just being intentional and in planning. It's like, okay, we know, what used to happen was more just tribal. It just kind of happened, right? Because generally speaking, this is the way it was. And then we knew how to interview. We knew how to make the offers. There were tried to true processes, but now knowing that, like you say, they might not even show up to an office, it's like, oh my gosh,
Yeah,
A, I got to make sure I get the forms right. And then
yeah.
B,
And
how's
Mike,
this person? Go ahead. Yeah.
sorry, I was going to say, I think it's important too with the new hire packet. We've had to be more flexible with that as well. So I think initially we went completely digital. The new hire packet was emailed, and I come to find that not everybody maybe knows how to use a digital signature, or not everybody has a printer at home where they can print this stuff out. So we really gone back to, yes, it can be digital, or we might prefer to send them an actual packet. And then once we send them the packet, they may not have a scanner, so we may need to accept photos of those signatures for the new hire doc. So I think it's really being flexible to the process in its entirety.
I just think about the psychology of it too. So like, I mean, I've been a work from home person for 20 years, and I certainly prefer less paper. But when your entire work relationship is founded on a digital interaction, there's just something tangible and real about having a nice branded folder sitting on your desk that, this is the company that just hired me. And there's something that I think real about that.
I agree. I agree, and that's why I quickly, after we, like I said, we started off being digital first. I quickly went back to that, to having those packets created and shipped to the employees' homes. I just think it's important. It's kind of like oh, it's my first day. Here's my laptop and here's my new hire packet, and I can just pull it out and just go ahead and dive in and start reading through the benefits and reading through all the forms that need to be returned. Whereas when you get an email, I don't know, it's just not as personable. So.
And I think I'd step out of character in this conversation for a second to say we're not even advocating for this process for anybody listening in today. I mean, you got to do what's right for you. If you're in a virtual 100% virtual software shop where everybody hates paper, I mean, it seems pretty obvious you'd go to a more electronic process. But if you are working with an employee pool, a talent pool that is maybe not tech savvy, maybe doesn't even have the tech resources, they might not have a printer or paper in that printer to sign and scan. That I think the message is probably really think about who your talent pool is, who your employees are, what do you want, and what is the experience you want them to have. Anything you guys want to add on this topic of hiring before we move on to onboarding?
Nope.
Okay. So, Krista, I think you're right. Cheryl has a cool thing around onboarding here. Can you maybe share what you've done with the new hire gift codes and new hire packets?
Yeah, so I think the onboarding has been a huge initiative for us, because we all know that first, even before the employee starts, we start that process of reaching out, having more touch points. And then we've really kind of gotten a core group of team members together to improve the onboarding process. It's always, there's always room for improvement. But one of the things that we did, so before your employee would come into the office, they would sit down and we would have maybe some new hire swag on their desk. Well, we don't have the ability to do that any longer. So we came up with their promo codes. We'll use promo codes, send those out to the employee, usually about 2 weeks before they start, so that we're having that touch point in between the acceptance of the offer and the start. And so the employee is able to go on to our Assure swag store and they get to pick a new hire gift. And rather than, determining what that gift is, everyone gets a water bottle or everybody gets a bag, whatever it is, we're allowing the person the ability to choose what they want rather than what we think they'll want. So.
Mike, what else would you add about, so when we think about onboarding, so in this COVID world, we've accelerated the digital components of these processes like onboarding. What processes and communications do small business owners need to be thinking about?
When I think about the small business owner, we have prospects, which is what you are as a candidate, and then we have customers, which is what you are when you're an employee. And this is where the retention begins of your employees. Is really an onboarding, because now you've got to prove that everything you shared during that interview cycle is real. So I think it's making them feel like they're cared for from day one and meeting the expectations that you've set throughout the interview process to what it's like to work here. And I think, warm welcomes from the hiring manager, from the team, some over communication about what they're bringing to the organization, so everybody can see the value, and the person has a sense of pride on that first day when they're starting remotely and they don't have the warm lunch or the handshakes that they're looking for there. This is where retention begins, and it's costly. Turnover is one of those things as small business that you won't realize how big the impacts are, but anywhere from 1 times to 2.5 times the annual salary is your cost of turning somebody over. So the longer you can retain an employee and prevent that turnover of that employee, the more impactful they're going to be to your business, and you can really drive down your cost of running your business by retaining them instead of turning them over. And it starts here.
Yeah, amen. You have a start out with a really great honeymoon. It can buy you a little extra time, as you might have to figure other stuff out, but there's nothing like a first impression.
Yeah.
Mike, can I add to what Mike Reed was saying in regards to that? A really good best practice, especially if you have a recruiter, like somebody like me, and they are handing off, as Mike says, the customer to a different touch points inside of your organization. It's really good to circle back around. I really like to, when employees that I have worked with, recruited, brought to the organization, I really like to check in with them. Week 1, week 2. It takes a little bit of extra time, but it also makes them feel like that they were a part of something from the very beginning that's going to continue through.
And you know what? Not every small business, in fact, probably very few small businesses will have, a team, let alone one or a team of recruiters working for them, right? It's going to be the owner, the entrepreneur, a small handful of managers that are doing this. But I think it's so easy to get caught up in the day-to-day that, to your point, Krista, you got to have that stopping point and then come back, say, hey, let's check in. How is it going? Have we met your expectations? Where have we exceeded your expectations, right? And get that temperature check, frequently through that first, 2 weeks, 60 days, right?
Yeah, to your point, just continuing the relationship with the people that I knew at the beginning of the process through the employment of the employee, for sure.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to jump to the next one and our last point, because I think onboarding it just dovetails so naturally to culture, right? And dare I say, it starts culture starts with maybe not the recruiting process, but at minimum the interview process. Ratify, like I like the way you said, hey, the company that you just got hired by, your onboarding process, does that match your expectations? Does it turn out you're working for the company you thought you were going to be working for? I love the way you said that. And those are all the beginning points of culture. Cheryl, maybe I'll ask you to start this one off. What are just some really practical things? So on this call, we're going to have managers at some pretty good sized companies. We're going to have lots of office managers and owners and entrepreneurs of small businesses. What are just some really practical things you can do to drive and create the culture you want in this touchless environment, especially with newer employees?
Yep. So one of the things that we have started doing is we do weekly webinars covering our mission, vision, values, so that every employee, week one, day one, or day two is getting to really dive in and learn about our mission, vision, values, and who we are and why we do what we do. Another thing that we've also implemented is it's a new hire FAQ webinar where, what's the dress code? Is it okay for me to eat at my desk? Just, there's a million things that as a new hire you're not sure about coming into a new office. So we also implemented that.
Awesome, Mike. Where do you see success? And without trying to call out any managers, where do you see shortcomings where this doesn't go as planned for the culture match after the fact?
Yeah, I think, where I've seen people struggle is where they're letting the business drive them instead of they're driving the business. And that happens on occasion, right? Business is fast, it's moving quickly, there's lots of challenges, but it's our people that help us achieve those outcomes. And as a leader or a manager, it's make sure you're taking the time to engage with your employees, that you're recognizing them for those culture things that are impactful to your business and that you've been talking about throughout the interview and onboarding process. And we've done some neat things with recognize our employees on a quarterly basis based on our core values as an organization. And it highlights how those core values are driving our business as well, right? So it's not just lipstick. This is really who we are. This is how you're impacting our customers. This is how you're impacting the business as a whole. And thank you. And I think that's where it goes really well. When it doesn't go so well, the goals aren't clear. The check-ins are missed. And that's where you start to lose people. And I think if you're doing those other things, you can make for a really spectacular experience for the employee that will turn into results for your company.
Yeah, amen. Krista, what would you add?
Mike, if I can really quick, this is Cheryl. I mean, another thing that we also added, to drive culture with, folks being remote, we're implementing quarterly performance reviews instead of doing that annual review that everybody dreads. And it's really a much shorter process, but it's forcing our managers to have those more frequent touch points with the employees. And we're tying, the goals and the KPIs to our culture, our mission, vision, value. So that's one thing that we've done to help accelerate the culture and make sure that everyone is really on the same page.
Cheryl, can you bring that to life a little bit? So I think everything you just said sounds like just intuitively right. And I think everybody kind of gets it, at least conceptually. But what does that actually look like in process? So, for how, specifically, how do you align, questions or review topics that align to vision, mission, values, culture?
Well, for me, I mean, it started within our department, but then, the HR is not necessarily who drives the culture, right? It's the people and it's the leaders, and we have to make sure that we're all living and breathing the mission, vision, values. So really, I mean, just in structuring the questions, we really wanted to make sure that they were aligned with our values, and that's basically what all the questions are, about, is our values, and making sure that we're talking about that more frequently with our employees. And then, of course, the quarterly reviews. I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes that managers can make is not being in contact with their employees on a regular basis and listening to their employees and helping their employees, see a career path and things like that. So I think this is going to help to drive that.
You know what? I'm gonna maybe after we just kind of go around the horn as we wrap on this. If you could just summarize, the big takeaways of this acceleration that COVID has placed on this touchless and digital. We broke it into 5 pieces of the process: recruiting, interviewing, hiring, onboarding, and culture. But what would be the one big takeaway, Cheryl? And I'll ask Mike and Krista the same, that you would want people to walk off this call understanding what has fundamentally changed and what they need to do.
For me, what has stood out the most, and from us all being spread out and being at home and not seeing each other every day and being in the office every day, for me, it's never been more important to pick up the phone and call someone rather than sending an email. You can solve so much, by picking up the phone and calling. It may take 5 minutes, where when you're emailing, it could take 2 days of back and forth. So for me, picking up the phone, connecting, calling, staying in contact is more important than ever.
Yeah, very good. Krista, how about you?
We were talking about the culture piece and just the consistency across that. I think we've accelerated, or even had to make ourselves be consistent across our process. And we were talking about culture. We can take culture all the way back to recruiting and make it a part of how we evaluate candidates. But for me, the big takeaway is really something we didn't hit on earlier, which is that quality of talent and that diversity of talent. It's really accelerated our ability to be able to drive quality and diversity into our organizations.
Yeah, very good. Well said. Mike, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of in the middle of Krista and Cheryl here. I was a person that, really did well in front of people internally in our organization, and that was my strength, was meeting with people in person and really understanding their business challenges there. So I've had to change and grow in the way that I access the business and the way I touch the business owners. Even though we had 5 different locations, often those people were coming to the corporate office, and I was sitting down and having meetings with them. And those relationships were formed, and I had better understanding of the business now. And so I've had to change the way I engage in the business, how I digest the information from those business leaders, and the differences in each team's culture. So I think for me, it's been that. And then on the candidate side, we've had to rethink a few things, and the way we engage talent, where talent is located, the opportunities it affords us, both from a diversity and a quality of candidate that impact our company and our performance going forward. Those things are all really important.
Yeah, very good. And I guess maybe I would add my 2 cents is I feel like so many of these things, whether it's the electronic nature of recruiting, in the digitization of forms and processes, the probably the 2 biggest things for me, takeaway for me, is number 1, at the front end, everybody's talent pool is not twice as big as they thought it was, or 5 times. In many cases, it's 1,000 or 10,000 times bigger, because unless that person has to come to an office, that work could be done anywhere. And what that could mean for finding not just the ideal talent when it comes to skill, but also a cultural fit that just is so in love with your mission and wants to get behind accomplishing the same goals, that's just a game changer like none other. And then just the forcing everybody to be deliberate. You can't just, hey, we're going to go manager A interview, then manager B interview, then manager C interview, and we all get together in the conference room after and debrief, because you lose all those eye contact and body language and fresh off the memory kind of stuff. You gotta plan out your questions. You gotta plan out your debrief. You just have to be more deliberate in the process. So hopefully this added value for everybody attending today. I want to thank everybody for your time. Assure provides human capital management for over 60,000 small businesses. Our mission is to help companies grow. In 2020, I think it's probably to help companies in many cases survive. It's a climate like we've never seen in our lifetimes. Obviously, the economic pressures, and I'd say the compliance pressures. There's been more major HR legislation passed in the last 9 months than there has in the prior decade combined. So it's a difficult world. We're here to support small businesses, whether it's providing payroll and tax and time and attendance and HR software, or we can actually be the payroll HR department and help you answer all those compliance questions and navigate these difficult waters. And so with that, Cheryl, Mike, Krista, I want to thank you for your time, and want to thank everyone else for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.